Hello and welcome to our today's video. We will be diving into the world of database design, and we shall be exploring the concepts of mapping cardinalities as well as the multiplicity. These concepts are critical in that they help to establish the relationship that exists between entities in a database. However, before we look at the mapping cardinalities, it's good for us to do a small recap on the concept of entity relationship. We said that entities normally represent real-world objects, and the relationships always define how those particular entities are associated with each other. Now, in our today's lesson, we are going to be looking at mapping cardinalities. And mapping cardinalities normally implies the number of entities that one particular entity is associated with another entity through what we refer to as a relationship set. We are going to say that we normally have three types of mapping cardinalities. The first one is called one-to-one. The next one is called one-to-many, and the last one is called many-to-many. First, we are going to begin with the one-to-one mapping cardinality. In this scenario, we normally say that an entity instance from one entity is associated with only one instance from another entity. In other words, we are saying that an entity in A is associated with at most one entity in B, and vice versa, that an entity in B is only associated with at most one entity in A. To help illustrate this, let's consider a scenario where we have two entities. One is called staff and the other one is called branch. A staff can only manage a maximum of only one branch, whereas a branch can only be managed by a maximum of one staff. That's what we are implying, a one-to-one kind of a relationship. So whenever we see a staff, we expect that staff can only manage a maximum of one branch, and vice versa, when we look at a branch can only be managed by a maximum of one staff. So the staff and the branch, they are the entities. Manage is the relationship type. And in terms of the cardinality, we are saying that it's a one-to-one. A staff will only manage a maximum of one branch. As you can see, that a staff number SG5 is only managing one branch, B003. And a branch B005 is only being managed by one staff. As you can see that we have a staff called SG37 who is not managing any branch, implying that a staff can manage 0 all the way to a maximum of one branch. Though we are going to look at that under what we refer to as multiplicity. So multiplicity is the possible range of occurrence of one particular type that is associated within another given type. For instance, we are saying that a staff manages a branch, but we want to know the extent to which a staff may actually manage a branch. And we normally use these particular symbols to represent multiplicity. And how do we read it? We normally read it as follows. A staff manages 0. A staff may not be managing any branch, or this ... implies the range, or a staff may be managing only one branch. That's how you read it. And then you come back on this side and you say that a branch can be managed by one staff or one staff. In this given case, a branch must have someone who is managing it, but it's possible to have a staff who is not managing any branch. So always take note of where we are placing this multiplicity. These are other examples that a person has a maximum of only one ID. You card, and an ID can only be associated with a maximum of one person. Another example is a department can only be headed by one HOD, and the HOD can only head one particular department. A passenger can only have a maximum of one airline ticket, and an airline ticket will only be associated with a maximum of one passenger. Next, we move on to the one-to-many mapping cardinality. In this particular case, we normally say that one entity instance from one entity class can be associated with multiple instances from another entity class, and an entity class from the an entity instance from the second entity class can be associated with only one instance from the first entity class. To simplify that, we are saying that an entity in A will be associated with any number of entities ranging from 0 to more of entities in B, and vice versa. An entity in B will only be associated with at most one entity in A. To represent that, we normally use the one ... asterisk. Let's give an example. A staff can oversee properties for rent, but in terms of one-to-many, it implies that a staff may either not be overseeing, for example, SG5, who is a staff, is not overseeing any property. However, you can see that SG37 is overseeing two properties. In this particular case, you're overseeing property PG21, PG36. SA9 is only overseeing one property. So we are saying that an entity in A, which in this given case can either be of these SG5, SG37, or SA9, can be overseeing 0, as you can see SG5 is not overseeing anything, or can be overseeing 1, as we are seeing SA9 is only overseeing one property, or can be overseeing multiple, as we are seeing with SG37. However, when we move to the other side, we are saying that the property for rent can only be associated by at most one entity. So any property for rent can only be overseen by a maximum of only one staff. You can see that PG21 is only overseen by one staff, PG36 only overseen by one staff, PA14 only overseen by one staff. But we are also having property that is not being overseen by any staff. To put that into perspective in terms of multiplicity, this is how we represent it. We are saying that a staff can oversee 0, so that means that staff is not overseeing any property, or can oversee one property, or can oversee many property. This is how you write it. And then, moving to the property for rent side, we can say that property for rent is overseen by either 0, you could have a property for rent that doesn't have any staff who is overseeing it, or by one member of staff. That's how you read and you populate it. The last one is what we refer to as many-to-many. In the many-to-many instance, we say that an entity in A is associated with any number, 0 to more entities in B, and an entity in B is associated with any number, 0 or more, of entities in A. To help us understand this better, let's look at an example involving a newspaper and a property for rent. We may have a newspaper that does not advertise any property for rent, or you may be having a newspaper that is only advertising one property for rent, or you may be having a newspaper that is advertising more than one property for rent. Again, when you jump on the other side, the property for rent may not be having a newspaper advertising it, or it's likely that that property for rent is being advertised by only one newspaper, or you may have that property for rent is being advertised by more than one more than one newspaper. In terms of multiplicity, this is how we represent it. We say that a newspaper advertises either one or more properties for rent. Or you can even begin from zero. A newspaper may be not advertising or may be advertising multiple properties for rent. And then you jump over to this side and you say that a property for rent is advertised by either no newspaper or can be one newspaper or many newspapers. That's how we normally populate the multiplicity. We have another example here which I want you to determine what's the mapping cardinality for this particular diagram. In summary, these are the different ways in which we normally represent the multiplicity constraints. 0.1 implies 0 or 1 entity occurrence. 1.1 implies exactly one entity occurrence. 0. Asterisk implies 0 or 1 or many entity occurrence. 1. Asterisk implies 1 or many entity occurrence. And there you have it. We have explored the three mapping cardinalities, the one-to-one, the one-to-many, and many-to-many, as well as the extent of their multiplicity. I hope this particular video has helped clarify these concepts for you. If you have found our video informative, please give us a thumbs up and kindly subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.